We begin today at the Mishnah on Daf Samach Tes Amud Aleph, towards the top of the Yamud. So this Mishnah continues from the previous Mishnah, which spoke about different halachas of yichos, and one of the things it spoke there is that when you have a situation where the Kidushin does not take effect, and that is when the erve was a isakaris. So the child that's born from such a relation is a mamzer. So here this Mishnah brings a machlokes. What do you do with a child that's a mamzer? Is there any way to be metayer a mamzer? The halacha of a mamzer is, the pasuk says, Lo yovei loy bekal Hashem gam deira siri. Lo yovei mamzer bekal Hashem gam deira siri lo yovei loy bekal Hashem. Can never come back into kal Hashem. So what do you do with this mamzer? Zok Heilige Mishnah, Rab Tarfon says, Yechoilin mamzerin li toir, that it is possible to be metayer a mamzer, that it should be back into the category of a regular yid to marry into Klal Yisrael. Keitzad, how do you do this? Mamzer shenosa shivcha. A mamzer that marries a shivcha kananis. So what happens now with the child? Havlad eved. The yichus of the child does not go after the father, it goes after the mother. That's another halacha that we learned in the previous Mishnah, that by a shivcha kananis, the yichus of the child goes after the mother. So now, he's the eved. Now, shichroi, if the master will then free this eved, nimtza haben ben chayrin, the child now becomes a ben chayrin, and he's not a mamzer, because his yichus does not go after his father, so now he's a yid for himself. He's like a ger. So this is how you can be metayer. You could stop the chain of the generations that the mamzer carries down through doing this. Rabbi Eliezer argues and says, no, hareze eved mamzer. Even if the mamzer will marry a shivcha kanan, it's not going to help you. It's only going to make matters worse. Not only is he going to be a mamzer, he's going to be a eved a mamzer. He's going to have both chesroinus from the mother and from the father. So there's no point in doing this. I'm going to bring a pasuk where Rabbi Eliezer learns this out from. The Shaila was asked about this eitzah that Rab Tarfon here says, how you can be metayer a mamzer. L'chatchila kamar, is Rab Tarfon saying that you're allowed to do this l'chatchila? Or diyevet kamar? Or Rab Tarfon is saying that if a mamzer will marry a shivcha, then it'll come out that now you have a way to be metayer the child. So Rashi explains the reason the Gemara has a shaila is because for a Yisrael, it's not allowed to marry, you're not allowed to marry a shivcha. Eved Ivri is allowed to marry a shivcha. Regular Yisrael is not allowed to marry a shivcha. Rashi brings the pasuk that says L'yiyah Kadesh. That pasuk is the source that you're not allowed to marry a shivcha. So how could he say shivcha kananis, right? So how could it say over here that this eitzah that the mamzer, which is also a yid, not allowed to, that he should go ahead and marry a shivcha? So maybe what he said is only b'di'evet. Or Rashi says maybe when it says in the pasuk L'yiyah Kadesh b'Yisrael, it means only by a regular yid, which is kosher. But a mamzer, which does not have the same status of a kahal Yisrael, maybe for him it's like not an isser to marry a shivcha kananis. So l'chatchila, he's allowed to go ahead and do this. If you're l'chatchila allowed, if the pasuk doesn't go on that, then yeah, the Kidushin will be teifus. Yeah, l'chayda. Yeah, she's mechoyivim. It's just like but still, by a regular yid, the Kidushin l'chayda is not teifus. But since over here it says L'yiyah Kadesh b'Yisrael, it could be that it's only going on Yisrael kasha, not on a mamzer. Tashema. So the Gemara tries to bring a raya. Amru loy l'Rab Tarfon. They said to Rab Tarfon that gave this eitzah, Tiharta es hazacharim. You will retire the zacharim with this eitzah that the mamzer will marry a shivcha. But v'loy tiharta es hanekevis. But you weren't metayer than a kevis. Why? What's the difference? Why don't you say the same thing a mamzeres? And a keva that some mazeres will also go and marry a evet kanani. Why isn't it the same eitzah? So at this point, what the Gemara understands is because to marry a shivcha or to marry a evet kanani is not l'chatchila. It's b'di'evet. You're going to have to do it in a tricky way, in a hiding way. You're going to have to find a shivcha kananis and go and marry with no one realizing what's going on over here. That's something that a zacha will go ahead and do. A man will go and find and figure out how to get this done if he wants to. But for an akeva, Rashi says it's not the derech for an akeva to go and find tachbulos, to go and figure out in a hiding way how to go and marry this Evet Kanani. That's what they told Rab Tarfon. So the Gemara says, so right here you see that this whole thing is undercover, it's b'di'evet. If Rab Tarfon was saying there's no problem with this, you're allowed to marry shivcha kananis. So mamzeres nami tinsiv lavdo. So then l'chatchila, let a mamzeres go ahead and marry an evet. He doesn't have to do this in some kind of an undercover way. It's very simple. It's l'chatchila allowed. So the Gemara says, no, evet ein lechayis. Evet Kanani, there's no yichus b'chlal. Right? The Gemara brought before already that when it comes to an Eved, it's a am hadoim l'chamer. So an Eved has no yichus b'chlal. So therefore, if a mamzeres is going to go and marry an Eved, so then the child has no yichus to the father. It's not going to help. This whole eitzah that Rab Tarfon gave only helps when you marry a shifcha kananis. But when it comes to an Eved, by an Eved Kanani, the child has no yichus to the father no matter what. So therefore, if the mother is a mamzeres and she's going to marry Eved Kanani, the child is still going to be a mamzeres. Because that it's like a behemoth. By a behemoth, there's no yichus to the father. The behemoth is born from the mother, and that's it. The relation of the child born is to the mother, not to the father. The same thing also by avodim, which is amadoim elachamar. There's no yichus to the father. So a mamzeres marrying Eved Kanani is just not going to help. That's what they were telling Rab Tarfon when they said that it's not going to, that your eitzah doesn't work for a mamzeres. But yeah, by Shivcha Kananis, the yichus goes after the mother. Tashema, so the Gemara brings another raya. Whether Rab Tarfon meant lechatchila b'di'eved, the ushpe zichnei, the Rab Simloi. Rab Simloi was once staying by someone, and his host was a mamzer. Hava. V'amalei, so Rab Simloi told him, if I would have come here before, or you would have waited for me before you got married, Taresinu lubinoch. I could have been Metayer, your son. I would have told you who to get married to, like the Eitzah of Rab Tarfon, that you get married to Shivcha Kananis, and then your son would be Tar. So the Gemara asks on this, so now if Rab Tarfon's Eitzah was Lechatchila, so Shaper. So then Rab Simloi was telling his host that I could have given you an Eitzah how to get married and to be Metayer your child. But if you're going to say that it's really a Isser for a mamzer to marry a Shivcha Kananis, it's only after the fact. If he was over on the Isser, then it's going to come out that the child born could then be Metayer if the master will free now this Eved. So my new, what does this mean? How could he say to his host that I would have given you advice to go and marry a Shivcha Kananis? He's not allowed to give him such advice. It's an Isser. My niu, the mintzavle is my niu. So what did he mean to tell him that he could be Metayer his child? Says the Gemara, the mintzavle eitzeh va'amalei. He gives him an eitzeh, and he tells him zil genoiv, that you could go and become an Eved Ivri yourself if you'll go and steal, and then you won't have money to pay. Viz dabin be'Eved Ivri, and you'll be sold like an Eved Ivri, and then you'll be able to marry a Shivcha Kananis l'chatchila. A Yid is not allowed to marry Shivcha Kananis, but an Eved Ivri is allowed to marry Shivcha Kananis. This is the eitzah that he could have given him.
So this is a better eitzah than marrying, telling him the chatchila. Both have eitzah.
Oh, so Rashi asks that question. How could the Gemara say that he's telling him to go steal? To go steal is also an Isser. So Rashi says the Gemara could have asked that question. But another point Rashi says is that he doesn't even have to steal for this. According to one opinion in the Gemara, before we had a machlokes about this, according to one opinion, Rabbi Eliezer earlier in the Masechta, he says even if a person doesn't steal, if he sells himself as an Eved, he's allowed to marry a Shivcha Kananis. There's a machlokes before if a Meicha Atzma is allowed to marry Shivcha Kananis, or only a Machru Bezdin, only if Bezdin sold you. The Gemara here brings a scenario which is according to everybody, that if Bezdin sells you, you're allowed to marry a Shivcha Kananis. But really, according to one opinion, even if you just sell yourself and you're now an Eved, you're allowed to marry a Shivcha Kananis. So he could have given him the advice, become an Eved Ivri, and then you could marry a Shivcha Kananis, and then your child will be freed and he'll be taught. That's maybe what Rab Tarfon, what Rab Simloi meant. So you could say that really the eitzah of Rab Tarfon is only b'di'eved. But that's if you don't sell yourself as an Eved. But if you sell yourself as an Eved, then you'll be allowed to marry Shivcha Kananis. But the Gemara asks on this can't be what Rab Simloi meant. Because Ubishani de Rab Simloi, in the time of history, in the time period that Rab Simloi was living, Eved Ivri mihave, was there such a thing, Bechlal, of a Yid becoming an Eved Ivri? V'ha'ama mar, but the Master has said, Ein Eved Divri noyig ele bezman shayovel noyig. The whole halacha of being sold as a Yiddish slave was only in the time when Yovel was in existence. That's when all Yidden were in Eretz Yisrael. In the time of Rab Simloi, after the Churban, there was no Yovel and there was no Inyan of Eved Divri. So that's not the advice that he was trying to tell him. Elolav. So therefore the Gemara concludes, Shema Mino, we must say Rab Tarfon l'chatchila ka'amar. Rab Tarfon that says that a mamzer, without selling himself to be Eved Ivri, could marry a Shivcha Kananis. This is l'chatchila. Shema Mino. This is a clear ayah. Amar Rav Yehuda Mashmuel halacha k'Rab Tarfon. We pass like the Rab Tarfon that you're allowed to marry a Shivcha Kananis l'chatchila, and then child will become Torah. Now the Gemara brings the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer in the Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer mamzer, that even after he will marry the Shifcha Kananis, the yichus will still go after the father, and the child will remain a mamzer. Amar Rabbi Elazar, my time at the Rabbi Eliezer. What's the source of what Rabbi Eliezer says? The Amakra loy. In the pasuk where it says about the fact that a mamzer is not allowed to marry into Klal Yisrael, so it says lo yavei mamzer b'kal Hashem gam doira siri lo yavei loy b'kal Hashem. Why does it say the term loy? It's an extra word. What it means is haleich achar psuloi. By a mamzer, you always follow the psul. If whether the father is a mamzer, whether the mother is a mamzeres, the child will always become a mamzer, and that includes even in a case where this mamzer marries a shivcha kananis. And usually the rule is that an eved that's born from a shivcha kananis becomes an eved like the mother and does not have a yichus after the father. That's what the previous Mishnah said. But over here, though, this word loy is saying that even in such a case, loy, it goes after the father, that the child remains a mamzer. The Rabbanon, which is really Rab Tarfon, that disagree with Rabbi Eliezer, how be Yisrael shenosam mamzeres. That loy is coming to add something, but it's coming to teach me the halacha about a Yisrael that marries a mamzeres. So I would, because otherwise I would say, what's usually the rule? The yichus of every yid, the status of him, whether he's a kohen, Levi, and Yisrael, goes after the father. That it always goes after the father, as this pasuk says. So maybe I should say the same thing. If the mother is a mamzeres and the father is not, so the child should not be a mamzer. He should go after the father. Also loy afke. So therefore, this loy comes and says that it goes after the one that's the mamzer. Whether the father is the mamzer, whether the mother is mamzeres, loy. It still continues. He remains a mamzer. That's the chiddush here. That it's not like it is usually that the status of whether he's a kohen, Levi, Yisrael goes after the father. But over here, no, he remains a mamzer. That's what the loy comes to say. The loy is not coming to say this halacha regarding a shivcha, but it's coming to say b'negei to Klal Yisrael. Within Klal Yisrael, when a mamzeres marries a Yisrael.
And the first child comes to be a klal, or the mother makes it a yid or not. So,
but the mother determines whether the child is a yid or not, but the mother doesn't determine whether the child is a kohen, Levi, or a Yisrael. Right. So within Klal Yisrael Gufa, if you have different statuses of what kind of a yid you are, if I can use that term, you would think that if the mother is a mamzeres and the father is a Yisrael, so you should be a Yisrael, not like the mother. So the law, according to the Rabbanan, is coming to say that no, you always follow the psul and you remain a mamzer. Rabbi Eliezer says that this law is coming for the point that he said, and explains why. Lav, don't I say, even though the pasuk says that the yichus of the yid, if he's a kohen, Levi, Yisrael, goes after goes always after the father. But over here, by a mamzer, it's an exception. It's different. Asa lo yafke. Loy says that the mamzerus follows the psul, the mamzerus. It doesn't go after the father. So hachanami, if so, I could say the same thing, that this loy is telling me that a mamzerus is an exception. I don't follow the regular rule also regarding a yid marrying a shivcha. So here as well, what's the rule usually by a shivcha? Ha'isha v'yiladeh tir ladinah. That the woman, this shivcha with her children, belong to the master, that the child is misyaches after the mother, to be a eved. So here as well, also lo yafke. The term loy over here comes and excludes that, and it says that the child is not going to be like the mother. The child is going to be like a mamzer, like the father. That is so. So the word loy, according to Rabbi Eliezer, is always telling you that we don't go according to the regular rule. Not b'negei to l'mishpachaysim l'veisavaysim by a yid, and not b'negei to a shivcha kananis, where usually the yichus goes after the mother. Over here, the loy comes and says that we don't do that, and the child remains a mamzer. The Rabbanon disagree with this. The Rabbanon say you cannot say that a child that's born from a father a mamzer and the mother a shivcha, that the yichus should go after the father, because kol vlad b'mei shivcha kananis, a child that's born from the womb of a shivcha kananis, kivlad b'mei behemet dami. Like we said before already, it's like born from a behemoth. By a behemoth, there's no yichus to the father. A behemoth that's born, the yichus is to the mother. The father is no yichus b'chlal. The same thing by a guy, there's no yichus to the father, and by a shivcha kananis as well, there's no yichus to the father. So you can't say that the loy over here is coming to say that when the father is a mamzer and the mother is a shivcha, that the yichus will go after the father. There's no such a thing. It's like a behemoth. By a behemoth, there's no connection to the father. If the yichus is only to the mother, then the child will be a shivcha. And once the child is a yichus to the shivcha, which means the child will be an eved. And if the child is an Eved, then if the master frees him, he becomes a regular Yisrael. Hadran Allah Ha'aymer. This is the conclusion of the third Perek of Masechta Kidushin. Okay, we begin the next Perek, the last Perek of the Masechta. So the emes is that the first and most of this next Perek here, it continues from the last two Mishnayos, which we began learning about the Inyanim of Yichusin, the lineage of a Yid. So here, this Perek continues in the same subject. There were 10 different levels of Yichus amongst Klal Yisrael that came up with Ezra when he brought Eden up from Bavel by the time of to build the second Beis HaMikdash. There were Kayani, Levi, Yisraeli, Chalali, which are the Kainim that are apostle. If the father, it was just a Kain, married a Grusha. Gadim came with him. Charuri, those are Avodim Canaanim that were freed. Mamzerim, Nisini. The Nisini came from the Gevinim, which were from the nations of Eretz Yisrael. They were Megayer, and they're also to marry into Klal Yisrael. Here Rashi says, David HaMelech was geyser on them. Shtuki va'asufi. And also a Shtuki and Asufi, which the Mishnah will soon explain what they are. They're both Yidden, that it's a suffix, what their status is. So now here the Mishnah says, the halachas of them marrying one another. So these are all complete kosher Yidden. They're allowed to marry one another. Now, here in the next category, the Mishnah drops Kainim and says, Levi, Yisraeli, Chalali, and Geiri, V'charuri, Mutarim Lavi Zebezeh. So they're allowed to marry one another, but not the Kainim. The Kain is not brought in this category because a Kain that is not allowed to marry Geirim v'charurim, because since he was Megayir and he was Charuri, so therefore a Kain is not allowed to marry a Zaina. And when before they were Megayir, before he was freed, so over there we don't know what they did, so therefore Kain can't marry. So therefore this only Levi Israeli are allowed to marry Chalal and are allowed to marry, and Chalal can marry a Geiri v'charuri. Geiri v'charuri, Mamzeri, Nisini, Shtuki v'asufi. So all these categories, they kula mutarim lavi zebezeh. They are allowed to marry one another. Right? So over here, because we're putting in the mamzerim and the nisinim, so the mamzerim and nisinim are not allowed to marry into Klal Yisrael, but they're allowed to marry gedim because gedim are not regular kahal Hashem in the lashon of the when it comes to marriage. It's not included in kahal Hashem. And nisinim as well. They're allowed to marry gedim and charurim and shtuki asufi as well. Even though Shtuki and Asufi, as we'll see in a moment, are suffix. We don't know what their status is. For all we know, they can be kosher Yidden. But Rashi here brings, the Gemara Darshans, that the Isser of a Mamzer to marry into Kahal Hashem is only when you have a Yid that has a definite status of being a kosher Yid. If it's a suffix, he's not, that itself, because of the suffix, he's not part of the regular Kahal Hashem, a Mamzer is allowed to marry him. So here the Mishnah explains, Ve'elehem Shtuki. This is what Shtuki means. Kol shu makes imoy. A person that knows who his mother is, but if he doesn't know who his father is. His mother was mizana with someone, and so therefore he knows who his mother is, and when he wants to say, when he wants to speak to his father, his mother quiets him down. Which shtuki means his mother quiets him down and says, don't refer to him as your father, because it's not necessarily your father. That's a shtuki. A sufi, kol shenesef min hashuk, a child that was left abandoned and was just taken in from the street. Asufi means taken in from an abandoned child. He doesn't know not his father, not his mother. That's an asufi. Abishal would refer to a shtuki, someone that beduki, which means you have to inspect the matter. The Gemara will explain what the significance of this term that Abishal gave to this. The Mishnah said that there were 10 different categories of yichus amongst Klal Yisrael that came up from Bavel. So here, the Gemara first focuses on the lashon of Alu. They came up from Bavel. Ma'ir yitanu Alu mi Bavel. Why does it say Alu? Nisni, why doesn't it simply say Holchul Eretz Yisrael? They went to Eretz Yisrael. And says the Gemara Milsai Gavorche Kamashmalon. The Mishnah here in passing is teaching me another point. Kedetanya, as we learned, V'kamta va'alisa alamakam meshivcha Hashem lekecha. You will go up to the place that Hashem chooses, which is to Har Moriah, to the Beis HaMikdash. Melamed, this pasuk teaches Beis HaMikdash Gavoya Mikol Eretz Yisrael. That the Beis HaMikdash in Eretz Yisrael is the highest place from the entire Eretz Yisrael. And another thing the Brisa says, Eretz Yisrael Gavoya Mikol Aratzis, and Eretz Yisrael is higher than all other countries around it. So the Gemara asks on this, Bishlam Beis HaMikdash Gavoya Mikol Aratzai Mikol Eretz Yisrael. In fact, the Beis HaMikdash is higher than all of Eretz Yisrael. Hainu d'chsiv, we see this from a pasuk, and here in this pasuk that the Gemara is going to quote is, it doesn't only say that you're going to go up. In the previous pasuk, when it says you go up, that maybe can mean from one direction. Here in this pasuk, you see from no matter what direction you come, because it says divrei riva is bisharecha. Sorry, when you have any arguments in your cities, the kamta va'alisa. So you will go up and to Eretz Yisrael, to the Beis HaMikdash, that is. You go to the Beis HaMikdash where the Sanhedrin is. So here it's talking about Stam, a Yid that's coming from any direction. In Eretz Yisrael, you come to the Beis HaMikdash, whichever direction you're coming from, you're going up. Ella, but Eretz Yisrael gavaya mikol ha'aratzos. When we say that Eretz Yisrael is higher than all other countries, minalan, how do you see that Eretz Yisrael, whichever side you come from, that it's higher from all other countries? Answer is the pasuk says, Lachein, in the Nevuah of the Gula Sideh, it says, Hine yamim ba'im num Hashem, lo ya'am ha'id chai Hashem, asher heles b'nei Yisrael meretz Mitzrayim. There will come a time where we won't praise the Eibusher for bringing us up from meretz Mitzrayim, Kim rather will say, Chai Hashem asher hela, v'asher es b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Tzafin, that He brought us from the north, which is Bavel, umikol ha'aratzos asher tachtem sham, and from all other countries that the Eibusher brought Yidden there. So we see here that not only coming from Tzafin do you go up, but also from Kol Haratzis, from whichever land you come, you're going up to Eretz Yisrael. So you see that Eretz Yisrael is higher from whichever direction you come from any country. That's what the Mishnah is telling you by saying the term Alu. But the Gemara still asks on this, Ma Yeri Detani Alu mi Bavel. Why does the Mishnah use the term Alu mi Bavel, that they came up from Bavel? Nisni Alu le Eretz Yisrael. Why doesn't it say that they came up to Eretz Yisrael? Why is it emphasizing the fact that they came up from Bavel? Says, answers the Gemara, what the term the Mishnah is using will be approved to the point that Rabbi Lazar said. Rabbi Lazar said as follows: when Ezra came up from Bavel, he didn't come up from Bavel. He turned Bavel into like a clean, pure flour for Allah, and then he came up. So Rashi explains, when Ezra came up to Eretz Yisrael, took the Yidden back with him to Eretz Yisrael, he took all the great Chachamim, all the Chachamim came with him to Eretz Yisrael, and there were Yidden that stayed behind in Bavel. But so he was afraid, if he's going to leave all the Psulim, all the Yidden that don't have proper Yichus in Bavel, and there's no Chachamim there that will tell people who's Pasul and who's Kosher, they're going to get mixed into Klal Yisrael. And we're not going to know who's Pasul and who's Kosher. So therefore, he separated all the Psulim, and he brought them up with him to Eretz Yisrael. So like this, in Eretz Yisrael, over there, there's a Bezdin, a Lishkas Agazis, and over there, it'll be easier to separate who's Pasul and who's Kosher. So therefore, he separated them and brought, and so Bavel then remained, whoever was in Bavel, we know for sure that they're Kosher Yidden. That's what he's saying over here, Olu mi Bavel, because Ezra brought them up, he brought up all these people, all these 10 categories the Mishnah says, including all these Psulim. So here the Gemara brings a discussion about this. There's actually two versions how to learn our Mishnah. Itmer. So now we learned the Machlokes regarding what is the Girsa of the Mishnah. Abaya Omar Olu. We read the Mishnah like we had it. That Asar Yuchsin Olu. What does Olu mean? Olu actually means Me'aleim. They came up on their own. All these 10 categories you mentioned here, they just came by themselves. Tanan. That's the version of the Mishnah. V'Rava Omar, but Rava says no Helum Tanan. You're supposed to read the Mishnah, Asar Yuchsin Helum mi Bavel. He brought them up, referring to Ezra. So here the Gemara says, so simply it seems, Kamiflagi but the Rabbi Lazar. They're arguing about this point that Rabbi Lazar just said. That Ezra is the one that he separated all the Psulim and brought them up to Eretz Yisrael. And then he came up. Abaye, Leslie the Rabbi Lazar. Abaye that says that these Psulim came up on their own. So then that means that he disagrees with what Rabbi Lazar said. That Ezra didn't do any of this. The Psulim they decided to join on their own. Rava Isli the Rabbi Lazar, but Rava that says that He'elum, he brought them up. So then the Lashon of the Mishnah is saying the point of Rabbi Lazar that Ezra brought them up. That's what it would simply seem. But the Gemara says, Iba Yisayme, but if you want, I can say the Kula Alme Islu the Rabbi Lazar. Both Abaye and Rava agreed to Rabbi Lazar that Ezra made an effort to separate the Psulim, that they shouldn't get mixed into all the Yidden in Bavel, because he knew he was leaving. He didn't want them to be mixed in with everyone else there. So, the argument here in the version of a Mishnah is as follows. Mar Savar, according to Abaye, what did Ezra do? Afrushi, Afrishinu. What he did is he separated them. Over there in Bavel, he took all those families which are Psulim and he made it clear and he announced to everyone, these are Psulim. He separated them. But he didn't bring them up. He didn't bring them. That was enough for everybody there in Babel to know that these are families of Pasul. But then what happened was uminafshayu sliku. They on their own, all these Pasul families on their own decided to join Ezra to come to Eretz Yisrael. Why? Because now that in Babel everybody knows that they're Pasul, they didn't want to stay there. They figured maybe let's join Ezra, go to Eretz Yisrael. There people don't know our Psul, so there we could start life new. So they joined Ezra on their own. That's why it says Olu, like Abaya. Umar Sabar Bal Korchayu Asakinu. That not only did he separate them, but he also, against their will, brought them up to Eretz Yisrael, so they shouldn't remain in Babel, and so in the future they should never get mixed in over there. So according to that, you go this in the Mishnah, He'elum, he brought them up to Eretz Yisrael. So the Gemara now asks, it's understood, according to the opinion that says that they came up on their own. So now it'll be understood, Haine da Amar of Yudah Shmuel. This explains what Rav Yudah said in the name of Shmuel regarding the status of the Yidden that are in Eretz Yisrael. So what did he say? Kol ha'aratzos, all other countries, Isa le'Eretz Yisrael, is considered to be a mixture like a dough. A dough is ingredients, which is a mixture. So the status of yichus that there are of Yidden in all other countries is considered to be a mixture, which means it's not such good yichus. There are psulim there if you compare it to Eretz Yisrael. And we're talking over here about all other countries besides Bavel. Other places where Yidden were, there weren't a lot of chachamim there, and Yidden over there just married and intermarried with one another, kshedim, psulim. So therefore, comparing all these other countries to the status of Eretz Yisrael, it's a big mixture. Eretz Yisrael is on a better level than that. On the other hand, though, the Eretz Yisrael Isol Bavel. Eretz Yisrael is considered to be a mixture if you compare the status of Yidden in Eretz Yisrael to Bavel. So now, why is this understood according to the Mandama that says Alu? Because the psulim that came up from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael came up on their own. And if they came up on their own, they tried to mingle and assimilate and integrate into Klal Yisrael, and therefore they were in Eretz Yisrael, and it wasn't necessarily recognized who they are. So therefore, in Eretz Yisrael, you have a lot of psulim that are dreng zich around, and therefore comparing to Bavel, Bavel is pure. All the psulim left. So over there, everyone is kosher. But according to the opinion that says that Ezra is the one that brought them up. He separated them and he brought them up to Eretz Yisrael. So made the Yadino. So doesn't that mean that Ezra brought them up and he separated them and everybody knew in Eretz Yisrael who the Psulim are? So true in Eretz Yisrael there were Psulim and in Bavel there weren't, but even in Eretz Yisrael the Psulim were known. So why are we saying that the Yichus in Eretz Yisrael is any less than the Yichus of Bavel? And says the Gemara, Nihidi Yadi Lahu Dara, even if it's true that in that generation of Ezra it was known, but Ladara Achrine La Yadi. But then in future generations, it not necessarily was known. They slowly began assimilating into Klal Yisrael, and therefore, if later in the future we say that in Eretz Yisrael the Yichus is not as good as Bavel, which was emptied out from all these psulim. Another question the Gemara here asks: according to the opinion, what?
It is better in Babel still.
Yeah, in those times, yeah. Today, there's no Yidden in Bavel. What?
Is Babel clean.
Yeah, that's the conclusion of the Gemara. Bavel is better than Eretz Yisrael. Another question here. According to the opinion that says that all these psulim came up on their own, which basically means that Ezra did not have a clear cheshbon of who's coming up with him. He separated them in Bavel, but then Ezra went up to Eretz Yisrael, and the Yidden that decided to join him, they joined him on their own. So we could see this in the Lashon of the Pasuk, because the Pasuk says on the way going to Eretz Yisrael, it's Vakaptem, Ezra says, I gathered all the Yidden Elanor by the river Habal Achva, a river in a certain place. V'nachna sham yamim shloisha. We rested there for 3 days, and then va'avina he started looking and analyzing which Yidden, the people that joined him. Ubekainim, he looked over there at the kainim that he has that joined him. Umibnei Levi lemetzasi sham. I didn't find any bnei Levi that were fit for the avodah. So Rashi points out, we'll see soon, and the Mishnah said it, that really Bnei Levi did join him, but he didn't find any Bnei Levi that were roi for the Avodah to play the musical instruments in the Beis HaMikdash. And here Rashi says, the tragedy that happened with the Bnei Levi was that when they were in Bavel, and Nebuchadnezzar asked them to sing for them or play for them, they didn't want, and they cut off the tips of their fingers, so they shouldn't be able to play music when they're in Galus and Bavel. So all the Bnei Levi that he had with him, they didn't have the fingertips that they were able to play the music. That's what he meant. That's what it means when it says that he didn't find Bnei Levi that are roi for the Avodah. So basically, what we see here in this pasuk is that Ezra didn't have a cheshbon lechatchila who's coming with him. When he came to this place, so then he went around looking and he analyzed to see who's with him. So this is understood according to the opinion that the psulim just came on their own. But according to the opinion that we said before, that the psulim that came, Ezra brought them up. So that means that he had a cheshbon with everyone that was coming with him. So Hamizah Zahidi, he was careful to separate the psulim and he knew exactly who was coming with him and who's not. So why is it saying that here, all of a sudden he noticed that the Kainim here, but he doesn't have proper Leviim? So the Gemara says, Nihi, the Izer, B'psulim, that true, he was very particular about making sure that the psulim will join him, because he didn't want them to remain in Bavel on their own, B'kshedim lo yizdar. But regarding the Kosher Yidden that joined him, the Kainim, the Leviim, Yisraelim, that he was not particular about. And that's what the Pasuk here is saying, that he only noticed this later. The Mishnah says, Kainu Levi Israeli, that they joined them, Kainu Levi Israelim. Minolon, where do we see this? The Slikud, that they came up with him. The Chsiv, the Pasuk says, as we quoted before, there the Pasuk continues and says that Vayeshvu, HaKainim, Va'Leviim, U'Minaom, U'Minamishayrim, V'Hashayrim. You had from the Leviim that are Mishayrim, and those that are Shayrim, the ones that sing, the ones that close the gates. V'Hanesinim Ba'Areim, V'Chol Yisrael Ba'Areim. So these are all the people that joined Ezra and they sat in their cities. They came up to Eretz Yisrael. So you see here all these categories that came with him. Now the Mishnah then said, Chalali, Geiri, V'Charuri. How do you see that Chalalim? This is what the Gemara is going to focus on over here. Where do you see that Pasal Kainim joined them also? Chalali Minalan. The Tanya, so we learn this from what it says in the Braise. Rabbi Yaisi says, Gedayla Chazaka. Chazaka is very, very powerful. And here we see the application of a chazaka benigeya to the Pasal Kayanim that came up with Ezra. Shanam, the Pasuk says, Mibnei Kayanim, Bnei Chavya, Bnei Akait, Bnei Barzilai, Ashalokach, Mibnei Barzilai, Giladi Isha, Vayikra al Shmam, and they got their name, Eile, Bikshu, Ksavam, Amisyachsim. So these were Kainim. Oh, this is a family of Kainim. And it was requested of them that they should prove their lineage, they should show their yichus. They couldn't prove that they have a proper yichus of kahuna. And they were desecrated, they were separated from the kahuna. And the Tishasa said to him, now the Tishasa actually refers to Ezra. Second, Nehemiah. Rashi says Tishasa refers to Nehemiah, and the Gemara Rashi brings from Yerushalmi that says that Nehemiah used to be the butler by the king, and he before he gave the king to drink, he would have to drink himself, so the king should see that there's no poison in it. So the word Tishasa means heter shtia, that he had a heter to drink from this wine, but he had to drink from this wine before he gave it to the king. That's how he got this next name. So Nehemiah told them, they should not eat from Kodesh HaKadoshim, which is the Karbanis, Adamayt Kayin L'Urim V'Tumim, until we'll have a Kayin with the Urim V'Tumim, which they did not have in the second base of Mikdash, to determine if they're kosher Kayinim or not. So here we see, what are we talking about? We're talking about a family of Kainim that couldn't determine their yichus, their pasal Kainim, and therefore he says they can't eat from the karbanis. He told them as follows: the status that you had before as Kainim, that will remain. And what is that status they had before? As Kainim, when they were in Bavel, what did they eat in Galos? They ate Kotche Yagvul. What's Kotche Yagvul? Truma. Truma refers to the produce that grows everywhere. So over there in Bavel, they ate Truma. So that, since you had that status as a Kayin before, and you ate from Truma, we continue on that Chazake, and you can eat from the Truma. Here in Eretz Yisrael as well, you can eat from the Truma, but you can't eat from the Kotche Kadashim. From the Karbanis, you won't be able to eat. Okay, so here, this is the pasuk where you see that these were the Chalalim, the Pasal Kainim, that came from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so now here, the Gemara is going to focus here on this point that Rabbi Yossi was saying. Rabbi Yossi was saying that here we see how powerful Chazakah is. Even though they couldn't prove their lineage with the Kosher Kayanim, but because they ate Truma and Bavel, we continue with that Chazakah, with that status, and they can eat now Truma as well. So the Gemara asks them this: how could Nehemiah allow them to continue eating Truma? Well, according to the opinion that says, Mailim mitruma leyuchsin. When you see a Kayin eating Truma, you don't have to question his yichus. He's a kosher Kayin. He can do the Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. His lineage is good. So how could you allow them to hani the ochel betruma asal asekino? If you're going to allow them to eat Truma, then you're going to come and say that they're kosher kainim. How can we allow them to eat truma? And says the Gemara, here it's not a problem because Shani Hasam Deriya Cheskasayu, over here, their chazakah is weakened because he made a clear distinction. He said you could eat truma, but not from kachi kachim. So the fact that you see that all other kainim could eat from the karbanis and they can't, that makes it clear that they're not kosher kainim. So no one's going to come to be mila them to be proper kainim. So the Gemara asks, "Ve'elo my gedoyle chazaka." What is the chiddush over here that Rav Yossi is saying? Look how powerful chazaka is. Adarabah, you're saying now that this chazaka is weak. That the fact that you were not letting them eat kachik kadashim, the fact that they ate truma before as kainim is not strong enough to allow them to eat from the kachik kadashim now. And says the Gemara, the strength of the chazaka is as follows. When they were eating truma in Bavel, there's no truma in Atayra in Bavel. It's chutzlaretz. In chutzlaretz there's no truma. Now, as Nechemi was telling them that here in Eretz Yisrael, they're able to eat truma even though it's truma in Atayra. So that's sort of elevating their status. We're using the chazaka to allow them to eat even more. Or another pshat the Gemara says, that really they're only being allowed to eat truma b'drabanan even now. Truma b'drabanan and nami b'drabanan achayil, only truma b'drabanan they can eat b'dairaisa lo yachal. They can't eat the truma min atayra. V'chi maskinon mitruma liyuchsin. The question that we asked before, that if you're going to allow them to eat truma, you might make a mistake and attribute to them a proper lineage. Midairaisa, that's only if they're eating truma min atayra. Midrabanan le maskinan. But if they're only eating truma midrabanan, everyone sees the distinction. No one's going to give them a proper yichus. So therefore, that's not a question. So the Gemara asks, but if that's the pshat, we're only allowing them to eat the truma midrabanan like they ate before. Yihachi mai gedoyle chazaka. What was the big chiddush Rabbi Yossi was saying? That here I see how powerful chazaka is. They can't eat more than they ate before, which is only the truma midrabanan. And says the Gemara, the chiddush here is the meikara lekelam migzar mishum truma deiraisa. When they were eating truma derabanan and bavel, there is no truma min atayra, and there's no reason to be concerned that if I allow them to eat truma derabanan, they may come to eat truma min atayra. Lebesayif, but then later here, once they came to Eretz Yisrael, afagav the ikal migzar mishum truma deiraisa. Even though there could be a gzeira, if you allow them to eat truma derabanan, they may come to eat truma min atayra as well. So, you would think that they should only. Nevertheless, he allowed them that. That is, he allowed them to eat the truma midrabanan and not the truma minatayra, and he wasn't concerned about the gzeira that they might come to eat the truma minatayra. So this shows you how strong. Once you have a chazaka, we accept and follow the chazaka, and we're not geiza any gzeiras. That's the point of the gedoyle chazaka. Okay, the Gemara asks one more question here on this pshat. But vaksiv, what does the pasuk say? He says, don't eat from the karbanis. Now, what does it sound from this? They can't eat from the karbanis. Ha kol midi, but anything else that kayanim eat, which is the truma, nechol, they can eat from any truma. They can eat from truma midrabanan or even from truma minatayra. How could you say that he was asking them from eating the truma minatayra? Answers the Gemara, according to this pshat, that they can't eat truma minatayra, hachi kamar. This is how you have to read the pasuk. When it says that he tells them not to eat from kodesh hakadashim is two things, kodesh and kadashim. He's telling them as follows: Loi midi de mikri kodesh. You can't eat truma that's called kodesh, v'loi midi de mikri kadashim, and not from the karbanis that are called kadashim. The Gemara explains: Loi midi de mikri kodesh. We see in the pasuk it refers to truma as kodesh. It says v'lechalzar la yechal kodesh. That pasuk v'chalzar la yechal kodesh is not talking about kachim; it's talking about truma. So here as well, Nechemi was telling them you can't eat from kodesh, which is the truma. V'loi midi de mikri kachim, and then you can't eat from what's called kachim, which is the kachim kadashim in the base of mikdash. Al-Makra, the pasuk says the bas kain kisil ishzar. He betrumas hakachim loy seichel. She shouldn't eat from the truma of the kachim. What does truma of the kachim mean? That she cannot eat from what's separated from the kachim. Right, this is a bas kain that married someone else, and so then she can't eat from the kachim. So this is the two things that Nechemi was telling these kainim here, that they can't eat not from truma and not from the kachim. They could only eat from the truma midrabanan that they were already eating before when they were on Bavel.